The sunlight in the Oregon mountains has a specific way of falling. It's not just light, it's a liquid gold that drips through the canopy of ancient pines. She was 32, a successful architect from Chicago, but here she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She was alone, truly alone. No phone signals, no neighbors for 20 miles, and no one to tell her that she was doing the right thing. "I'm here, Julian," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, "just like we planned." She looked at the empty chair beside her. It was a simple Adirondack chair, weathered by winters and sun. Julian should have been sitting there, probably sketching something in his notebook or complaining about the lack of high-speed internet. But Julian was gone, leaving behind only a map, a key to this cabin, and a legacy of love that felt too heavy for Elena to carry. The memory of first rain. Elena stood up and walked toward the edge of the porch. The air smelled of damp earth and wild sage. She closed her eyes, and suddenly she wasn't in Oregon anymore. She was back in New York City, 5 years ago. It was the kind of rain that turned the city into a neon-lit watercolor painting. She had been standing under a crumbling awning, trying to protect her blueprints from the downpour. Then he appeared, a man with a lopsided smile and a jacket that looked like it had seen better days. He didn't offer her an umbrella. Instead, he stepped out into the rain and started dancing. "It's just water, Elle," he had shouted over the thunder. "It's the earth's way of washing away the mundane. Come on, dance with me before the sun forgets what we look like." She had thought he was crazy, but 5 minutes later she was soaked to the bone, laughing until her lungs burned, dancing in the middle of a Manhattan sidewalk. That was the day she learned that love wasn't about finding someone to hide from the storm with. It was about finding someone who made the storm feel like a celebration. The cabin's secrets. Shaking off the memory, Elena went inside. The cabin was a time capsule. Every corner held a piece of a life they were supposed to build together. On the mantel sat a single photograph, Julian laughing, his eyes crinkling at the corners. She opened the wooden chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were his sweaters. She picked up the navy blue wool one and hugged it to her chest. It still held a faint trace of him, the scent of cedarwood and old books. "Why did you leave me the map to this place?" she asked the empty room. She knew the answer. Julian knew her better than she knew herself. He knew that in the chaos of her career and the grief of his passing, she would lose her soul. He had sent her here to find it. She spent the afternoon walking through the woods. Every tree seemed to whisper a secret. In the USA, the wilderness is vast and unforgiving, but today it felt like a giant, soft blanket. She found a stream where the water was so clear it looked like glass. She sat by the bank and began to write in her journal, not about work, but about the way the light hit the water. She realized that even though she was physically alone, her heart was crowded with him. Every beautiful thing she saw, a red-tailed hawk soaring above, a patch of wildflowers, was something she was seeing for both of them. The sunset vow. As evening approached, the sky turned into a canvas of deep violets and burning oranges. Elena went back to the porch. She realized that she hadn't spoken to another human in 3 days, yet she didn't feel lonely. She took a deep breath, the mountain air filling her chest. "I'm not going to run anymore," she said loudly. She looked at the horizon where the sun was dipping below the peaks. In that moment, she felt a warmth on her shoulder, like a hand resting there. It might have been the fading sun, or it might have been something else. "I love you," she whispered, "and because I love you, I will learn to love this world without you in it. But I'll never be alone. You're in the wind, you're in the gold, you're everywhere." She went inside, lit a fire in the hearth, and for the first time in months, she didn't cry. She picked up a book, wrapped herself in his sweater, and began to live again. The night in the Oregon wilderness was a different kind of entity. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a living, breathing presence that pressed against the windows of the cabin. Inside, the fireplace crackled, sending orange embers dancing up the chimney. Eleanor sat on a rug, the navy blue sweater still wrapped tightly around her. As she stared into the flames, her eyes caught something unusual. Near the base of the stone fireplace, tucked into a small crevice that looked accidental, was a weathered piece of paper. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and pulled it free. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a hand-drawn map of the trail behind the cabin, marked with Julian's unmistakable symbols, small stars and tiny laughing suns. At the very end of the trail, he had written, "Where the stars touch the water." "What are you playing at, Julian?" she whispered. "The night trek." Despite the darkness, Eleanor felt an irresistible pull. She grabbed a flashlight, pulled on her hiking boots, and stepped out into the night. The forest was transformed. Under the silver glow of a hunter's moon, the trees looked like silent guardians. Every step she took felt like a conversation with the past. She remembered a night in Chicago when they had stayed up until 4 a.m., sitting on the roof of their apartment building, talking about their dreams. "If I ever go missing," Julian had said, looking at the city lights, "don't look for me in the crowds. Look for me in the places where the world is still quiet. That's where the real stuff happens, Elle." She followed the map, crossing a small bridge made of fallen logs. The sound of a waterfall grew louder. Her breath came in short gasps, the cold air biting at her cheeks, but she didn't stop. She realized she wasn't just following a map, she was chasing the last echoes of a man who had loved her more than life itself. The reflection of a soul. Finally, the trees cleared. She stood on the edge of a hidden alpine lake. The water was perfectly still, acting as a giant mirror for the sky. Thousands of stars were reflected on the surface, making it look as though she was standing on the edge of the universe. In the center of a small stone pier sat a weathered wooden box. Inside was a final note and a small silver compass. The note read, "Elle, you've spent so much time looking back at where we were. I brought you here to show you where you're going. The compass doesn't point north. I fixed it to point toward the cabin, toward home. Because home isn't a person and it isn't a place. It's the peace you find when you realize you are enough." Eleanor sank to her knees on the wooden planks. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was full. She looked at her reflection in the star-filled water. For the first time in months, she didn't see a widow or a grieving woman. She saw a survivor. She saw someone whose heart had been broken into a million pieces, only for each piece to catch the light like a diamond. The vow of the wild. She stayed there for hours, watching the stars move across the sky. She realized that Julian hadn't left her. He had simply changed form. He was the cold wind on her face, the silver light on the water, and the strength in her own legs that had carried her up this mountain. In the USA, they call this the great outdoors, but to Eleanor, it was the great inwards. She had traveled 3,000 miles to escape her life, only to find that life was waiting for her right here in the middle of nowhere. As the first hint of dawn began to gray the horizon, Eleanor stood up. She held the compass in her hand, the needle pointing back toward the cabin, her temporary home. She said, "I'm going to be okay." And this time, she believed it.